My name is Mel. I'm from Springfield, Ohio. I have 7 years clean from a substance use disorder. Today I am a mother, a wife, a sister, a friend, a sponsor, and a sponsee.
Mel, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to come and talk with us today. We really appreciate it. Your story is going to inspire hope in people, and we really thank you and grateful for you coming out today. Can you start with a little bit about your childhood? So family relationships, were your parents together, trauma, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. I would have told this story differently at other points in my life, but today I would tell you every family has some level of dysfunction. And my family was pretty functional on the scale of all experiences. My parents were together, still are together. I grew up middle class, relatively little drama, no substance abuse in my home. I did well in school. I was involved in lots of things, relatively happy, healthy, definitely knew that I was loved.
So when was that first use? What did it look like and what did it do for you?
The first time that I heard someone describe it the way that I experienced it was a real connection. So it was a pretty typical use. I was probably 14, 15 years old. But I was shy and I was awkward. And for the first time, I wasn't shy. I wasn't awkward. You know, most teenagers use something at some point. They start experimenting and they have different experiences. Oh, that was fun, or that made me sick, or that was scary. And then I found over the years that people like me, they have the experience of, finally, I'm comfortable in my own skin. This is the way I'm supposed to feel all the time. And that was my experience. I understand now that it was way too intense. I was far too sensitive to it. Mm-hmm. I had far more of a reaction than a normal person.
Can you share a funny and or tragic story that highlighted the deep parts of your use?
So I was an English teacher for 12 years. And I always say that I did not go to work drunk twice. I got caught twice. So on the first time, I was called into the principal's office like a child. And I was talking to these people for minutes, trying to feign absolute shock. What? And he said, "You still have your sunglasses on." So it had been, I'd been a couple hours into the day and I still had my sunglasses on. And I don't know why that sticks with me, but it really does. So it's kind of funny and tragic. Yeah.
Did you end up losing your job because of it?
Oh, yes, yeah. The first time they put me on a second chance contract, which for a union job is a big deal. Yes. And that means I cannot sneeze incorrectly, and they can fire me. And I truly believed that I would be with something so important at stake, because I loved this job and I was good at it. With something so important at stake, I would surely be able to not drink before I went to work.
Right.
And not drink while I was at work. And that just did not turn out to be the case. So I made it about another 6 months before they caught me again. And then that was all she wrote. So, yeah.
How are your relationships impacted with family, friends, and stuff like that during your use?
My goodness. It nearly decimated my relationship with my husband. I came home one day to all my shit on the front porch. Al-Anon really, really helped him. I withdrew from everyone else. I was surrounded by a lot of really healthy people. And the people who did use, they were the ones going, I'm not participating in this with you anymore. So they really withdrew, and I withdrew. I didn't really have any good relationships with people. They were superficial, or I was lying, or I was feeling guilty or ashamed all the time. And then, of course, as things progressed, I was at home drinking in solitude.
How did your disease progress?
Okay. Well, everything for me started and ended with alcohol. Marijuana and cocaine are a big part of my story, but eventually they interfered with my drinking, and I was able to stop them. Cocaine especially, and I still use marijuana every once in a while when the anxiety was too much, and I would use that to come down. But really, drinking was my love, my only love. But it progressed in a typical way, a way that I found is really, really typical, especially for women. I was a heavy drinker, a really good drinker. Man, was I proud of that. For a long time, I look back now and I see that I had lost control long before. It was obvious I had lost control. But then there was a tragedy with my youngest son, and he was molested by a family member. And it kind of just absolutely tore apart my family. And it really took off then. It really, really took off. I believe now that it would have anyway. That was just the catalyst. You know, I have a unique brain, and it would have happened, but that set it in motion very, very quickly. So within a span of just a year, it was daily. I was either asleep or I was drunk. Withdrawal symptoms, massive, massive amounts of alcohol, not eating, not being able to do much of anything without it. So it happened pretty quickly at that point.
At what point did you recognize that you have a problem?
There were a few moments of clarity that I quickly drowned out. There was one pretty early on. I had people over, so it had to be early on if I still was having people over. We're having a cookout of some sort. Great day, long day drinking kind of day that normal people enjoy also. And there were like, man, 6 people and 3 beers in the fridge, and I was having a panic attack. And no one else had a problem with this. No one else was panicking. When I started having physical withdrawal, I definitely could no longer deny that it was a problem. You know, I couldn't light a cigarette without a few shots. You know, that made it undeniable. But there were some moments of clarity before then, for sure.
What happened that you decided to get help?
I always say that there were a couple of times when I was husband ordered to treatment. You know, there was a morning on my couch, and I'm lying there, and like I'm trying to drink enough so that I can light a cigarette and I can function without drinking too much, because I have to waitress later in the day. I know that I can't hold this tray without my hands shaking and wobbling and spilling the drink, so I'm trying to hit that magic function without going overboard. The first several shots came up with some blood in them, you know. I had pissed myself. I couldn't exactly remember whether I'd gotten my son on the bus or not. And just total and complete bankruptcy in every sense of the word. And I'm lying there, and it just comes to me. Certainly didn't hear a voice or anything like that this is as good as it gets. It's going to get so much worse than this. But this right here, right now, is as good as it gets. And then I went to treatment for the 3rd time. I completed treatment in June, but my sobriety date's in August. So I still had a little bit more, I had another good idea. But that's when I decided, that day.
What kind of support helped you the most in your early recovery?
Well, like most of us with this disease, I tried every way I could think of to stop on my own. And the only thing that worked for me was a 12-step path to recovery. The women in there especially, and then eventually the men as well, but the women in there, it's like a guide. It's a person who has walked this path. She knows exactly where the pitfalls are. She knows exactly what's going to trip me up, what's going to help me along. She's been there. That's what worked for me.
What was it like connecting to the recovery community for you?
Well, at first it was terrifying. And the first meeting I ever went to, so at one point in time, I was absolutely, thoroughly convinced that my problem was anxiety. I had no idea anxiety was a withdrawal symptom from alcohol, none. And depression, I really believed that. I had a really traumatic experience with one of my children. And so I was going to this therapist, and she, so many people, they can see things that a lot of people can see things before I can see them. That's just the defense mechanisms of this disease. So she suggested an AA meeting. I thought this woman was herself completely insane. I'm like, you need to go to a therapist. Are you not listening to me? Why would I go to an AA meeting? So I went to this meeting, and I found exactly what I thought I would find. A bunch of idiots. Quoting cliches and, And then later on, about a year and a half later, I went on my own with a different mindset, an open-minded mindset. And I found something entirely different. And I absolutely forget the original question.
That was it. You nailed it.
Okay.
I think it's good because they're talking about perception. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? We perceive what we want to perceive in that moment. How has your employment journey changed in your recovery?
So I did not lose my teaching license. I don't know how or why. I don't know if they didn't want the publicity. I was an excellent teacher for a long time, so maybe they were hopeful that I would get some help and come. I don't know. But I didn't lose my teaching license. And so initially that was in the back of my mind when I started to see that recovery was possible and that this just might work for me. But the universe had different plans. And so for a while I went back to school, I was a server. And I did substitute teaching, was just the most miserable thing I've ever done in my life. But I really like serving. I look back now, I was working on the weekends and I was working in the evenings. What a perfect recipe for someone. It's like, let's get you working at the most high-risk times that there are. Let's get you working. Fast-paced, low stress. I don't have to take any part of my work home with me, any of that. So eventually I chose to work in the recovery field, and today I'm a drug and alcohol counselor at one of the centers I was a client in. Yeah.
So you came to McKinley Hall.
Uh-huh.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Did you do the residential service here?
I did not. I did residential in Dayton.
Okay.
Yeah, at Access Hospital.
So do you have your CDCA or do you have an LCDC?
I have an LCDC.
Okay,
Yeah.
very good. So what does your recovery look like today?
When I heard this sort of thing in the beginning, I just probably outwardly, I tried to keep it inward. I just rolled my eyes, whatever. And, I assumed that these people were like the kind of person who maybe got sick once or embarrassed themselves once. I'm like, you don't know what you're talking about. You weren't like me. Okay. But I still continue to say it because I needed to hear it over and over and over again. Eventually I began to believe it as I began to hear these people's stories. And I was like, well, maybe you do know what you're talking about. Maybe you were a little bit like me. So life is still life. But I cannot exaggerate how good recovery is, how much better life is. So this disease, how many diseases are you better off for having them than if you never had it at all? How cool is that? So today, it turns out I'm not very shy. It turns out I do like people. It turns out some people appreciate my being awkward and quirky. It turns out I can help people. All that big pile of shame and guilt and crap, and I can't believe I did that. And what kind of mother does that? What kind of wife does that? What kind of teacher does that? It turns out that's the very thing that I can use to help the next woman. My marriage is better than it ever would have been, I think, if I hadn't had this disease. My youngest son was 7 when I got clean, and so he kind of grew up in the rooms a little bit, so he really loves it. Sometimes I'll hear some recovery pop out of his mouth and he has no idea. If I'm not the problem, there is no solution, shit like that. I have these really cool friends. I'm involved in things that really matter to me. I can hike and I can read, and I love to camp and I love to be outside, and it's just really, really, really good.
What do you do today to maintain your mental, physical, and spiritual health in your recovery?
So I work a 12-step program to recovery. Some days better than others. I walk a lot, physical health. I hike quite a bit. So 12-step recovery involves prayer and meditation. I spend a lot of time with people, which I didn't think that I liked to do, but I do, especially people in recovery. I spend a lot of time with my family and in things that make me glad to be alive. And the list of things that make me glad to be alive just keeps growing and growing.
So you mentioned a little bit about this before. So mentioned a little bit about like the religious piece of kind of your early like life and stuff like that, and then moving in. Do you mind sharing a little about your higher power today?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So so tell me a little bit about your spiritual well-being and how you kind of overcame some stigmas as far as spirituality was concerned.
Sure. So I grew up in a Southern Baptist church. And in my experience, it was very unhealthy. I was going to say bordering on abusive, but it didn't border. It went right over that line. So I had a big beef with organized religion and against God and that sort of thing. And plus I was too smart for all of that, right? So in the beginning of 12-step recovery, had kind of been beat into a state of reasonableness and open-mindedness, and I was listening, and there was this woman sitting in a meeting, and she was talking about her higher power, and she referred to her higher power as a him, and then she said, or she, or it, or fuck, I don't know, I don't care, I just know that it is. And I went, oh. And that woman's still my sponsor today. So she taught me all about spirituality, and I've continued to explore that on my own. One of my very favorite things about 12-step recovery is that spirituality, religion, lack of religion, none of that is a barrier. None of that is a requirement. There's room for all, no matter what. So my higher power is a fact for me, but I couldn't define it. I wouldn't assign a gender to it. That seems to be really important to some people, but not to me. I like to think of it as I've got like the most developed brain on the planet, right? Humans do. But it's still pretty limited. It's still pretty finite. So if I'm going to try to grasp the infinite, I'm going to fuck that up. So I'm going to stop trying. I'm just going to seek it, connect with it, calm down. One thing that all religions agree on is love one another. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to serve other people with this disease to the best of my ability, because that's how I got out of it, as a woman was willing to do that for me. And so I'm just going to keep doing the best I can and not try to define that, because so far I haven't been able to.
In your recovery, what dreams do you have for your future?
I have this fantasy of when I retire. So there's which is quite a ways away. But, and I've met some women like this who, and men like this who are just super, super involved, and they've got all these people that they have time to help. Mm-hmm. I want to travel. Mm-hmm. I love to travel. And I want to read. I never have enough time to read. But you know what I want out of life has really changed. My grand sponsor, she carries around this poem. I'm going to misquote it. I should have brought it with me. But it said, I sought God, and God I couldn't see. And I sought myself, I sought my soul, and my soul eluded me. But then I sought my brothers and sisters, and in them I found all three. Mm. So that kind of sums it up for me. It turns out that the key is in other people, in service.
Mel, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to come and share some inspiration and hope for those who still need to hear it most. Your story will help to spread awareness, humanize addiction, end stigma, and inspire hope one story at a time. Thank you so much.